You can now take a hike in the water of beautiful Lake Tahoe. California state parks have developed Tahoe's first underwater trail. It's called the Emerald Bay State Park Maritime Heritage Trail, and it includes 4 different sites showcasing sunken historic boats.
Imagine standing on the shore of one of America's most beautiful lakes. The water is so clear you can see deep beneath the surface, reflecting the surrounding Sierra Nevada mountains like a giant mirror. Every year, millions of visitors arrive believing this place is one of the last untouched natural wonders in the country. But what if everything people believed about this lake was only half the story? In recent years, as Lake Tahoe's water level slowly dropped, something unexpected began to emerge. At first, it seemed harmless. Old rocks appeared where water had once covered them. Forgotten beaches stretched farther into the lake than anyone remembered. Tourists took photographs, calling it another strange effect of the drought. Then divers entered the water. What they found wasn't just trash left behind by careless visitors. It wasn't a forgotten fishing boat or an old dock buried beneath decades of sediment. Instead, every dive revealed something stranger than the last, transforming one of America's clearest lakes into a place filled with unanswered questions. And the deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the discoveries became. Lake Tahoe has always seemed different. Sitting more than 6,000 feet above sea level along the California-Nevada border, it isn't just another mountain lake. It is enormous, stretching for miles in every direction, with water so unbelievably clear that people often compare it to glass. On calm mornings, the reflection of the mountains becomes so perfect that it almost feels impossible to tell where the sky ends and the lake begins. Yet beneath that beautiful surface lies an environment unlike almost any other freshwater lake in North America. The water remains incredibly cold year-round. Sunlight disappears long before reaching the deepest sections, leaving vast areas locked in permanent darkness. Some places plunge more than 1,600 feet below the surface, deeper than many skyscrapers are tall. Those conditions create something unusual. Instead of rapidly breaking down objects that fall into the lake, the cold temperatures dramatically slow the natural process of decay. Items that disappear beneath the surface can remain surprisingly intact for decades. 4 years, that seemed like nothing more than an interesting scientific fact. Today, many researchers believe it may explain why Lake Tahoe has been quietly preserving secrets for generations. Long before modern environmental laws existed, the Tahoe region experienced an explosive period of growth. After World War II, improved highways made the area far easier to reach. Resorts expanded. Hotels appeared along the shoreline. Casinos attracted visitors from across the country. Construction crews worked almost non-stop as vacation homes, businesses, and entertainment venues transformed the once quiet mountain landscape. Growth brought prosperity. It also produced enormous amounts of waste. Construction materials piled up everywhere. Machinery wore out. Old vehicles became useless. Businesses generated chemicals and industrial leftovers that required disposal. But during the 1940s and 1950s, environmental regulations were almost non-existent. Back then, people often viewed nature differently than they do today. Deep lakes, abandoned mines, and remote valleys were frequently treated as convenient dumping grounds rather than fragile ecosystems. Lake Tahoe's incredible depth made it especially tempting. From the shoreline, it looked almost bottomless. Many assumed that once something disappeared beneath those dark waters, it would never be seen again. For decades, that assumption appeared correct. As the years passed, visitors admired Tahoe's crystal-clear water without realizing what rested thousands of feet below. Everything changed when prolonged drought conditions lowered the lake. Even a small drop in water level exposed areas that had remained underwater for years. Hikers walking newly uncovered shoreline began spotting unusual objects. Rusted metal. Old bottles. Pieces of machinery. Tires buried beneath sand. At first, most people assumed they were simply looking at decades of accumulated litter. Then volunteer cleanup teams entered the water to remove the debris. Instead of finding isolated trash, divers discovered something much larger. Entire automobiles. Some rested upright. Others lay on their sides as though frozen in time. Several appeared surprisingly well preserved despite spending decades underwater. Their outlines remained recognizable. Door handles still existed. Windows were intact. Paint could still be seen on portions of the bodywork. It looked less like an underwater junkyard and more like a forgotten parking lot swallowed by the lake. Nobody expected to find so many vehicles. The question became obvious. How had they all gotten there? Accidents explained only a few. The locations suggested something else entirely. Some vehicles appeared deliberately placed far from areas where crashes normally occurred. Others rested near locations that had once provided easier access to the shoreline decades earlier. Investigators began mapping every discovery. The pattern became impossible to ignore. This wasn't one isolated incident repeated a handful of times. It represented years of dumping. As these discoveries gained public attention, researchers expanded their investigation. Human divers could safely explore only limited depths. To reach the deepest parts of the lake, scientists turned to remotely operated vehicles equipped with powerful lights and high-definition cameras. The machines slowly descended into darkness. 400s of feet, little changed. More debris. More abandoned equipment. More evidence that Lake Tahoe had quietly collected decades of forgotten history. Then the cameras reached depths few people had ever seen. Sunlight vanished completely. The water became almost perfectly black. Only the artificial lights mounted on the robotic vehicle revealed what lay ahead. The silence was overwhelming. Nothing moved except tiny particles drifting through the water. Then shapes began appearing within the camera's beam. Large cylinders, one after another, rose stretching into the darkness. Industrial barrels. Not one, not 10. Far more than anyone expected. The operators watching the live video initially struggled to believe what they were seeing. The camera moved closer. Several containers still showed faded markings despite spending decades underwater. Others appeared badly damaged. Some rested individually. Others formed clusters suggesting they had been dumped together. The deeper the vehicle traveled, the more barrels appeared. Every turn of the camera seemed to reveal another section of the underwater field. Eventually, researchers realized they weren't documenting a random collection of discarded containers. They were looking at what appeared to be a massive dumping site hidden beneath one of America's most famous lakes. Questions immediately followed. What had been inside those barrels? Who placed them there? And perhaps most importantly, were they still sealed? Scientists carefully collected water samples near several containers. Laboratory testing would take time. Meanwhile, investigators continued documenting the underwater landscape. As the robotic vehicle advanced farther across the lake floor, another unsettling detail became obvious. Some barrels looked damaged. Metal surfaces had deteriorated after decades underwater. Small openings were visible. Around several containers, the water appeared slightly different. The camera captured faint clouds drifting slowly away from the damaged barrels. Unlike rivers or shallow lakes where currents quickly disperse contaminants, Tahoe's deep water remains remarkably still. Anything leaking from those containers could linger for long periods before gradually spreading. Researchers knew they had discovered something potentially serious. Yet they still had no idea exactly what the laboratory results would reveal. As samples traveled to scientists for analysis, another mystery emerged. The cameras continued moving across the lake floor, documenting debris that didn't match industrial waste. Objects no one expected to see resting nearly a quarter-mile beneath the surface. Items that suggested the lake might have preserved far more than discarded machinery. And what investigators saw next would completely change the direction of the entire expedition. The discovery of the barrels changed everything. For decades, Lake Tahoe had been considered one of the cleanest and most carefully studied lakes in the world. Scientists had spent generations monitoring its clarity, studying its ecosystem, and protecting its famous blue waters. But now, hidden beneath that perfect surface, researchers were facing a completely different reality. A lake could look untouched from above while hiding decades of human mistakes below. The first question was obvious. What exactly had been dumped into the deepest parts of Lake Tahoe? Laboratory analysis began revealing the answer. Inside and around some of the damaged containers were traces of substances associated with older industrial activity. Heavy metals and chemical compounds that were once common in manufacturing, automotive work, and other businesses during the middle of the 20th century. The discoveries pointed toward a disturbing possibility. During the rapid development of the Tahoe region, waste that would be considered dangerous today may have been discarded in ways that were legal, ignored, or simply overlooked at the time. The people responsible likely believed the same thing many others believed about deep lakes. Out of sight meant gone forever. But nature does not work that way. A lake is not a place where objects disappear. It is a place where they wait. The same cold water that preserved abandoned vehicles also preserved the evidence of what had happened beneath the surface. And as researchers continued examining the findings, they realized the problem was much larger than a few forgotten containers. Lake Tahoe had become an underwater archive of human history. Every object resting on the bottom told a story. Some revealed the growth of the region. Others revealed the careless decisions made during decades when protecting the environment was not considered a priority. Old boats showed how transportation changed around the lake. Vehicles revealed how quickly communities expanded. Industrial materials showed how businesses operated before modern environmental standards existed. But among all the discoveries, some objects created the most questions. Not because they were dangerous, because they were personal. Divers found items that appeared to have belonged to ordinary people. Pieces of clothing, personal belongings, objects that once had meaning to someone. These discoveries created a strange feeling among the teams exploring the lake. They were no longer simply removing trash. They were uncovering forgotten moments from the past. Every dive became a journey through decades of hidden history. And then came the mystery that has fascinated locals for generations. The legends of Lake Tahoe. For more than a century, people have told stories about strange discoveries beneath the lake. One of the most famous legends involves rumors that the deep waters may contain evidence connected to people who disappeared during the region's darker years. During the 20th century, especially around the rise of casinos and organized crime activity in the area, rumors spread about people vanishing without explanation. Some locals believed the lake's incredible depth made it the perfect place to hide evidence. The stories became part of Tahoe folklore. But stories are not proof. For years, there was no confirmed evidence supporting those rumors. Only speculation. Only unanswered questions. However, the new exploration of the lake created renewed interest in those old stories. The advanced equipment being used by researchers could now see places that had remained unreachable for most of human history. The same technology that discovered abandoned cars and industrial waste was revealing sections of the lake floor nobody had ever properly documented. Still, separating fact from legend remained extremely important. Not every unusual object found underwater represents a mystery. Not every rumor becomes reality. Researchers continued focusing on what they could prove. The environmental discoveries alone were already significant enough. The challenge now was deciding what should happen next. Removing underwater waste from a lake as deep as Tahoe is not simple. At first glance, the solution seems obvious. Find the barrels. Bring them to the surface. Dispose of them safely. But underwater cleanup at extreme depths is incredibly complicated. Moving old containers can create new risks. A damaged barrel resting peacefully on the lake floor may release far more material if it is disturbed incorrectly. The pressure changes. The container moves. The weakened metal breaks apart. A cleanup operation designed to protect the lake could accidentally create a larger contamination problem. Scientists faced an impossible decision. Leave the waste where it is and continue monitoring, or remove it and risk disturbing what has remained buried for decades. There was no perfect answer. Only difficult choices. This situation also raised another important question. How did this happen in the first place? The answer was not about one person or one company. It was about an entire era. A time when environmental awareness was limited. A time when many communities across the world treated nature as something that could absorb endless damage. Lake Tahoe was not the only place affected. Across America, rivers, lakes, and oceans received waste that would never be allowed today. The difference with Tahoe was that the lake preserved the evidence. Its cold, deep waters acted like a time capsule. Decades later, technology finally opened that capsule. And what came out was a warning. Beautiful places can still carry hidden scars. The surface does not always tell the whole story. Today, Scientists continue studying Lake Tahoe. They monitor water quality. They investigate historical pollution. They document underwater discoveries. Every new survey adds another piece to the puzzle. The lake remains one of the most breathtaking natural locations in the United States. Its blue water still attracts millions of visitors. Its mountains still create unforgettable views. But beneath that beauty is a reminder of the choices humans make. For generations, people assumed the bottom of Lake Tahoe would never be seen. They were wrong. Drones, underwater robots, and modern science changed that forever. The darkness could no longer hide what was placed there. The lake had kept its secrets for decades. Now those secrets were coming back to the surface. And perhaps the most important lesson from Lake Tahoe is not about what was found. It is about what other places might still be hiding. Around the world, countless lakes, oceans, and rivers hold pieces of forgotten history. Some contain lost civilizations. Some contain abandoned technology. Some contain evidence of mistakes people hoped would disappear. But water remembers. Time passes. Generations change. Buildings rise and fall. People forget. Yet deep beneath the surface, objects remain exactly where they were left, waiting for the moment when someone finally comes looking. Lake Tahoe was once believed to be a perfect natural paradise. Now, people understand it differently. It is still beautiful. It is still extraordinary. But it is also a reminder that even the clearest waters can hide the darkest stories. And somewhere beneath those waves, surrounded by cold silence and complete darkness, more discoveries may still be waiting. Because the bottom of Lake Tahoe has only started revealing what it knows.